346 people. They boarded aircraft built by the most storied aerospace company in the history of human flight. They trusted the name on the fuselage. They had every reason to. This is not a story about a plane crash. It's a story about what happens when the people who count the money finally defeat the people who do the math. Before we get to the collapse, you need to understand the Cathedral, because you cannot fully comprehend what was destroyed without first understanding what was built. In 1966, a man named Bill Allen made a decision that should have killed his company. Pan Am's Juan Tripe had come to him with an idea: an aircraft twice the size of anything flying, 490 passengers, intercontinental range, a plane so large it would require airports to rebuild their infrastructure just to accommodate it. The 747. To build it, Boeing spent more money than the company was worth. They called it the Incredulous Bet. Engineers privately called it Bill's Folly. If the 747 failed, if the orders didn't come, if the airframe cracked, if the engines couldn't deliver, Boeing would cease to exist. Not restructure, not downsize. Cease to exist. Allen bet everything, and his engineers delivered. The 747 did not merely succeed. It restructured the global economy. It made mass international travel accessible to the middle class for the first time in history. It moved cargo at a scale that rewired supply chains across continents. Over 50 years of production, more than 1,500 aircraft delivered. A single design, born from one audacious bet by one man who trusted his engineers, that quietly, permanently altered the physical movement of civilization. And it wasn't just commercial aviation. Boeing's engineering reached into space. The first stage of the Saturn V, the rocket that put human beings on the surface of the moon, was a Boeing contract. Rocketdyne built the engines. But the machine that survived the most violent controlled explosion in human history, that had to perform with zero margin for error at the moment of maximum consequence, that was Boeing's work. There was a phrase used inside Boeing's factories in those decades, a piece of institutional shorthand that said everything about the culture. When a young engineer made a critical decision, signed off on a design, approved a tolerance, committed to a specification, a colleague would sometimes stop them, look them in the eye, and ask one question: would you put your family on it? That question had an answer for nearly a century. The same answer, every time. The engineers made sure of it, not because the regulations demanded it, not because the lawyers required it, but because that was the code. Because Boeing was not merely a corporation, was a belief system, a culture so strong, so deeply engineered into the identity of its people that it seemed, to everyone inside it and to almost everyone watching from outside, permanent. Nothing that large, built that carefully over that many decades, could simply be undone. They were wrong. To understand what happened to Boeing, you first need to understand McDonnell Douglas. Because the conventional story says Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas in 1997. The real story is considerably darker. McDonnell Douglas, a company that had spent 15 years dismantling itself, effectively acquired Boeing's culture, and it did it from the inside. By the mid-1990s, McDonnell Douglas was a ghost of an aerospace company. Its commercial aircraft division was functionally irrelevant. Airbus and Boeing had carved up the global market between them, while McDonnell Douglas's MD-11 and MD-80 programs hemorrhaged cash. Its defense contracts were shrinking. Its stock was in freefall. The engineers who hadn't been laid off were demoralized. The company was not restructuring. It was decomposing. And yet, when the merger was announced on December 15, 1996, The headlines treated it as a Boeing triumph, a $13.3 billion deal, the world's largest aerospace merger. Boeing absorbing its ailing American rival to create an unchallengeable colossus. Analysts celebrated. Shareholders celebrated. What nobody examined closely enough was who was walking through the door. Harry Stonecipher did not come to Boeing as a supplicant. He came as a converter. He had absorbed the GE doctrine completely, the belief that manufacturing companies were being run wrong, that the engineers, the lifers, the people who measured success in thrust-to-weight ratios and fatigue cycle tolerances were fundamentally confused about what a corporation was for. A corporation, under the Welch gospel, was a machine for generating shareholder returns. Everything else, the product, the workforce, the institutional knowledge accumulated over decades, was a variable to be optimized or eliminated. Stonecipher became Boeing's president in 1997, then its CEO in 2003, and he was explicit, almost admirably, almost insultingly explicit, about his intentions. He told the Chicago Tribune in print that he had joined Boeing to change the culture, to make it less of an engineering society and more of a business. He said it plainly. He was not hiding. The engineers read that interview. They understood exactly what it meant. The changes came in layers. First, the board. Engineers who had spent careers at the company were eased out, retired, thanked for their service, replaced by people fluent in financial instruments, supply chain cost reduction, and quarterly earnings management. Then the executive committee. Then the budget process, the mechanism by which an engineering culture actually expresses its values. When finance controls the budget, finance controls the decisions. The engineers didn't lose their titles immediately. They lost something more fundamental, the ability to say no. Then came the headquarters. In 2001, Boeing announced it was moving its corporate leadership from Seattle, Washington, where it had been rooted for 85 years, blocks from its factories, embedded in the same community as its engineers, to Chicago, Illinois, a city with no aerospace tradition, no manufacturing base. A city chosen, executives explained, for its centrality and business environment. Translated, a city chosen to place management at maximum distance from the people actually building the aircraft. The people left behind in Seattle understood the symbolism immediately. You don't move your headquarters away from your factories because things are going well. You do it when you have decided, at the highest level, that the factories are no longer the point. And then the money started moving. Stock buybacks, the mechanism by which a company purchases its own shares, artificially inflating the price, enriching executives whose compensation is tied to that price, and consuming capital that could otherwise fund engineers, facilities, and aircraft programs. Between 2000 and 2019, Boeing would spend more money buying back its own stock than it would invest in research and development. The numbers are not ambiguous. They are not a matter of interpretation. They are a choice, recorded in quarterly filings, signed by executives, approved by boards. A choice made, repeatedly, over nearly 2 decades. The 787 Dreamliner should have been the warning. Boeing had outsourced the aircraft's production so aggressively, parceling components to suppliers across Japan, Italy, South Carolina, Kansas, that nobody, at any single point in the organization, held the complete picture. Parts arrived that didn't fit. Tolerances had been interpreted differently by different suppliers working from the same blueprints. The carbon fiber fuselage sections, the technological crown jewel of the entire program, had to be shimmed with fasteners because the joins were out of specification. Years were lost. Billions evaporated. It was a catastrophic proof of concept. The GE playbook, applied to aerospace, had produced a manufacturing crisis that would have ended a less iconic company. The engineers who had warned against the outsourcing strategy, who had documented the risks in internal memos, who had raised their hands in meetings, had been overruled. Systematically, consistently, by people whose performance reviews did not include a line for structural integrity. The cathedral was still standing, the same buildings, the same runways, the same name above the door, but something had been methodically removed from its interior. Something that, unlike a fuselage section or a wing spar, could not be reordered from a supplier or written back into an org chart or restored by a new CEO with a recovery plan and a press release. The next aircraft they built in that condition would not merely be delayed, it would fall from the sky